Hi, in this video we're going to show you two really simple ways to join your granny squares together, and it doesn't have to be granny squares. This will work on any square motif that you've got as long as the stitch count's the same on the two things you're trying to join together. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at joining with a UK double crochet or a US single crochet, and then we're going to move on to looking at doing the same sort of join but using slip stitches instead. So both very secure joins but just give a slightly different finish. So I've got two small granny squares here, and I'm going to be working with a contrast yarn. You might want to choose a yarn that kind of matches your outside round of your squares. You might want to do that, and that will make things much more discreet. It will be more difficult to see the join, or you might want to use a contrasting colour to make a feature of the join. But let's have a look at what the join looks like, and that will help guide your decision. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop a couple of stitch markers into each of these squares. And the reason I'm going to do that is for our join to work, we need to line up our stitches on both squares. Now, as you get more familiar with what you're doing, you might not need to use stitch markers, but as a, to start with, I found it really helpful to do this to keep those stitches aligned. So I've got two squares here, and what's going to happen is I'm going to put one on top of the other to kind of to join together. And the way I'm going to do that is both of these are currently right side up, and I'm going to put them right sides together. So I'm going to take that one on the right is going to sit on top of the one on the left, and that's important because that sort of shows us where we need to put our stitch markers. So if it was folded as I've just shown you, with the one on the right on the one on top of the one on the left, we would expect to start our crochet up here somewhere, wouldn't we? So what I want to do is I want to sort of mark where my first stitch will go, and when it's sat like so, my first stitch is going to be around here. So I'm going to pop a stitch marker into what is actually the last stitch of the last cluster on the top side of this work. So I'm going to put a little removable stitch marker in there, and what you can do is you can use little safety pins or little bits of waste yarn or anything at all. It doesn't have to be anything fancy, it's just a place marker. Okay, so that's there, and when, again, I keep showing you this, but when it's sat on top of the one underneath, you will see that our stitch marker needs to go in a different place on this one. It needs to be on the sort of closest edge to the one here. So again, we're looking at this top edge. This is where we're going to be working, and I'm going to put a stitch marker into the first stitch of that first cluster along that top edge. And again, just a little removable stitch marker, but it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be anything at all, just to mark that place. Okay, so as I've already shown you, I'm going to take this right hand square and put it on top of this left hand square. Now, it's not so easy to see on this little piece of work, but you will have other projects where it's very obvious which is the right side of the work and which is the wrong side of the work. And for this first join, I'm going to show you the join being on the back or the wrong side of the work. And to achieve that, we need to put our right sides, these sides, we need to put our right sides together and make a little sandwich like this. If you've ever done any sewing, you'll be familiar with this. You'll be familiar with putting the right side of the fabric together and sewing along on the wrong side. And that's basically the same thing that's happening here. Again, if you followed our granny square videos, you will know all about how we join in yarn, and I'm going to use that same method to join my yarn in here for this join. And I'm going to join my yarn as we have kind of making all these granny squares. I'm going to join it into a corner chain space, and all I'm going to do is put my hook through, but my hook goes through both squares. Can you see it's going through both layers of fabric rather than one? Going through both squares at the corner. And I am picking up the yarn, and I'm going to secure it just by pulling up a loop. All right, so all that's doing is securing that yarn in place for me. And to make a start, what I'm choosing to do, and again, this is personal preference, you need to have a play with this and see what you like the look of, but I've decided I'm going to put one double crochet, UK terminology, or single crochet, US terminology, in that corner space. Okay, you might want to do more, you might want to do 2, but for now let's just stick with 1 and see what that looks like. Okay, so this is where our little stitch markers come into play, because if I turn it this way on, you can see now, let's just get that neatly, you can see now that I've got a nice guide where my actual stitches start, because what I want to do is get my hook passed through 2 layers of fabric, or both squares, rather than just 1. So I can see my little blue stitch marker here and put my hook into that stitch where the stitch is marked, and I go across to the back and do the same under that stitch where the little yellow stitch marker is sitting. And there's a lot going on here. I'll take the stitch markers out in a minute, but you can see the hook has gone under 2 layers of fabric, and that is both squares, and that's where I'm going to make my stitch. So again, UK double crochet, US single crochet, it's the first one we ever learned and it's the one we're most familiar with. Just make a stitch, and before anything else I'm going to just remove these stitch markers to get them out of the way. Okay, they are now gone, but we've got our sort of mark. Our mark has happened because we've put our first stitch in. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to work along that top edge of my granny squares here and put that same stitch in every stitch going across. So we know that our little clusters here are made up of 3 stitches, and I know I've just put a stitch in the first one, so I've got 2 more to do. And I'm going to move across into the next stitch on this square, and I'm going to move across into the next stitch on the back square. And at this point I would say to you, if you need to kind of pull this open a little bit to make sure you're not putting 2 stitches into 1 stitch, that's totally fine, because you need to work along and have the same number of stitches, as I said at the beginning, on each square. So everything is just going to have 1 stitch in. So I'm moving along to the 3rd stitch of this cluster, just checking the stitch behind. And again, you can see if I look at the top, I've gone through 2 layers of fabric there. Okay, and that's another little stitch. And now I've got to, on my granny square, I've got to another chain space. Now this is again where you've got a personal choice. You can choose to skip that and not put a stitch into it if you don't want to, or you can put a stitch into it to secure it, and this is where you have a little experiment and see what you like the best. I'm choosing to put a stitch into my chain spaces. So all the way along, I'm going to put 1 stitch into every stitch and a stitch into those chain spaces as well. Okay, and that's all it is. We're just working along the top edge here, putting a stitch into every stitch on this this top square, and making sure we pass our hook through the back square as well. So we are joining the 2 squares together in a really simple way, and putting 1 stitch into that chain space again. And I'm going to go all the way along so that you can see 1 fully joined edge. And again, take it slow, open out that back so you can see whether you've put a stitch into a space already and you're not going to go into it again. Because I'm saying this because I've done all of these things. I've put 2 stitches, 3 stitches into 1. I've missed them out, all sorts of things. So really good idea to have a practice on a couple of squares before you go into your full blanket, and so you're kind of really practiced at it. So I've now come to the corner again, and I'm going to put just 1 stitch in there for now, just so we can see what it looks like. So if I take my hook out, you can see it's not unusual. You'll recognize this. We've got a little row of stitches here and a little row of chains at the top, and what I'm looking at here is the wrong side of the work. So if I open out these squares, this is what the right side of my work would look like. Okay, so you can see those little stitches all the way along that join. Okay, now I mentioned at outset I'm using this contrast colour yarn. I'm using this yellow yarn. If I'd used the orange yarn, the same as my outside edge here, you would struggle to see that. It would be a very discreet join, and you wouldn't you wouldn't see those little stitches quite so obviously. So that's what the right side of your work would look like. Again, this is why experimenting with different colours is a good idea, because you might, if you want to make an obvious join, or if you've got multiple colours of squares and you can't do one uniform colour that's hidden amongst everything, this is a good time to practice, because you can see whether you like the look of it or not. So what that looks like on the reverse side of the work is quite different. If I turn that over, sorry, it's that way up. If I turn that over, you can see what we're looking at here is the actual stitches. And on this side, you're looking at the reverse side, or the wrong side of the double crochet stitches, or US single crochet stitches. You will remember that they've got these little V's going the other way, or if you look at it the other side, you'll see it's just a nice sort of raised ridge. I really quite like this, and again, when it's in a matching colour, it just sort of just gives a little raised look to the join. So if you did that on the right side of your work, you would have this kind of feature raised join of stitches. And the important thing here is that if I pull, they are joined. These squares are joined. So the practical thing is ticked off our list. Everything is joined nice and securely. So that is how you do a really simple join with UK double crochet, US single crochet. So let's have a look at what that looks like if we just use slip stitches. Okay, so I've got my stitch markers back in place, and I'm going to put right sides of my work together. So again, I'll be working the join on the wrong side of the work here to see what that looks like. And again, I say to you, experiment and see what you think. So I'll join the yarn in the same way, going through the corner space, but going through both squares. So we've got, we've already kind of got a bit of a join from the get-go, really. So pulling up a loop, and that is my yarn secured into place. So this time I'm using slip stitches. So again, my hook in this corner space goes all the way through both layers of fabric, or both squares, but rather than making that sort of UK double or US single, I'm just going to slip stitch. It just makes a flatter seam. So again, finding my first stitch and putting my hook under the one on the top square here, and making sure it goes through the corresponding one on the back square, and making my slip stitch. And now I've got that join, I've got that marker, I can remove my stitch markers again. Okay, so same thing again, I'm just working all the way along my square, to make sure I don't disappear off the screen there, all the way along my square, making slip stitches, and I will make a slip stitch into the chain space, just so we can see all the way along what it looks like in different spaces. So what it looks like in a stitch and what it looks like in a chain space. And as you'll know, slip stitches give no height to the work. They're just a way of sort of travelling along the work. But they do serve this purpose. If you want to join, they do serve the purpose of securing two pieces of fabric together. So we'll get a not such a pronounced seam made with the stitches themselves, but you'll see the effect that it does give. So I've gone all the way along in the same way, and I'm going to go and put one slip stitch, oops, I got caught there, one slip stitch into that last corner. Pull it out a little bit just to keep it secure, and have a look. Now my first thoughts here are, this is a tighter, it's a less flexible, it's a less stretchy seam. So you might find that you want to go up a hook size, perhaps, if you are slip stitching your seams closed. This is where you experiment. This is where you work all of these things out for your larger project, all right? So you can see we've got a row of slip stitches here. Just all you can see on this side are the V's, and all you can see on the back, very, very difficult to see, all you can see are the sort of running stitches across the back there. And if I open that out onto the right side of the work, I feel that this is a less neat look. Again, if it was in the same colour, you wouldn't see it, and that's fine. But if you're looking for a contrast colour, I don't like this quite so much. I think it is slightly I don't know, it just doesn't look as pleasing to my eye, but you might absolutely love it, and that is absolutely fine. For you know, everybody's choice is personal. So look at it on the wrong side of the work, however, and I really like this. I really like this. So if I was to do this join, look how it's made this really nice seam. I like this nice ridge which has been created from the edges of my work. So it does bring the size of the squares in a little bit, but it makes this raised edge like a feature, and I really like this. I think if I was going to use this join, I would make it on the right side of the work, and I would make it with a colour of yarn that was kind of hidden, so orange in this case, and then it just becomes a feature. It becomes this raised feature, which I really quite like. Still nice and secure, just like the other one, and it's a stitch we're all familiar with. Okay, so those are two really straightforward ways to join your squares together. We do have some more advanced techniques in our technique video playlist for looking at things like join as you go. So have a little look at those if you sort of find yourself very interested in joining methods. But if you're looking for something quick and easy and effective and popular, this is a join that is for you.